This is the facilitation of Chapter 38 on gender and gifted students, which is a research piece done by Barbara Kerr and Karen Multon. So today we're going to be looking at the interaction of giftedness with gender identity, gender role, and gender relations. Now, if you don't know what these mean exactly, that's okay. I will define those shortly. But it's important to know that a student who is gifted can struggle with any or all of these. Okay, but to define each of them, and for the purposes of this study, giftedness is one's potential for exceptional achievement or eminence in a domain, while gender identity is the subjective sense of one's maleness or femaleness. Okay, gender role are the expectations of a society about the proper behaviors for males and females. So just a little note there for gender role. These are not things that individuals can change. These are the expectations that a society places on people based on their gender. Gender relations are the attitudes and behaviors of males and females in relationships with one another, and the ways in which gender roles shape social relations. And then the idea of distance from privilege is the distance that an individual must travel to reach the center of power in any domain, in terms of overcoming barriers such as gender, race, class, age, and citizenship. Now, distance from privilege. A few of those things people really have no control over. Obviously, citizenships can change. Gender can be fluid. It can change. Race, age, those are static. And class, obviously, we have social mobility here in America, so that's capable of being changed. Probably less so for students, though, because their class at the time that they are still minors is really connected to their parents. So here are some gender qualities of gifted students. So for females, gifted girls are more like gifted boys than like other girls. This results in complication in gender identity. So gifted girls are more likely to enjoy boy activities, but they also have a very early awareness of sexism, and they reject the second-class status of the female gender role. Now, you probably see this in politics, and you see it throughout history as women who were certainly gifted. If we think politically, recently we think of Hillary Clinton, we think of Michelle Obama, who have, of course, high degrees from prestigious universities that really reject the second-class status of the female gender role. However, girls experience the same socialization as average girls. Okay, so they're held to the same standards, but they have a different gender identity formation. So they're told that they're supposed to act one way when they feel a completely different way, which in turn makes them prefer older friends who may be exhibiting more independence and ability to choose what kind of status they have and what kind of activities they participate in. Also, there's the stigma that girls are bad at math, and this bias exists even in the gifted community. Now, for males, gifted boys struggle with gender identity because they prefer creative activities sometimes instead of sports or video games. And this can cause a lot of conflict because boys traditionally, culturally, can be stigmatized to participate in sports and video games. And this in turn can make gifted males fear loving art, music, and drama because these things are not seen as masculine enough. They are expected to find their own way to elite colleges and high-status careers, and sometimes they're held back more often in kindergarten. Okay. Also, this may be a reason that boys who are gifted underachieve more often because they're trying to establish that masculinity, as we saw at the top of the list. Female gifted students are often early readers, but they're also multi-talented, which results in being pulled into many directions. This can make them very susceptible to anxiety and depression. However, because of their gifted status, they're much more skilled at masking these issues. They're also at risk for compromising their dreams and goals for the sake of romance and intimacy, which goes back to the female as the second-class citizen and those gender roles that are to be expected. Okay, so girls feel as though to fulfill this future in which women are seen as marrying and having a family, they'll sometimes compromise what they could have done in order to fill that gender identity. Intellectual abilities are more developed than their social maturity, which means that this is not a parallel relationship where social maturity catches up to intellectual ability. So there's a bit of a scaffold there, which can cause problems as well. Males underachieve more often than gifted girls, which is what we spoke about on the last slide, where that can be a way to claim masculinity. They're also at risk for misdiagnosis with ADHD, bipolar disorder, and conduct disorder, because as they are held back more often, they are well beyond the intellectual abilities of their classmates, which causes them to act out because they're not challenged enough in the classes that they're in. They also may avoid girl-led or girl-dominated activities such as choir, yearbook, or drama. There is a greater tendency towards risk-taking, and in terms of counseling and teaching, males are presented with less opportunity than girls to discuss open relationships. Now, the giftedness of LGBT students, I'm aware that there are more identifying factors within the LGBT community, but for the purposes of this article, they only included lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender students. So, these students meet the federal, professional, and cultural definitions of giftedness at approximately the same frequency as non-LGBT students. However, being twice different can lead to depression and isolation. So I already talked about the gender issues that students that are gifted face. Well, these students face those same issues, but they also face the issue of being an LGBT student. So this double layering can really lead to a lot of isolation, a lot of depression. They can feel isolated from not only their peers, but their parents and their teachers. Often, they fear parental rejection, they fear bullying, and the desire to be similar to others in their peer group is something that they would like to see happen. And I think that we're moving in that direction as a country. But I totally understand, especially here in the South, how that doesn't always happen. And I've seen many, many examples of this being in a high school. They're more likely to choose safe careers than pursue areas that are a better fit for their interests and abilities. Now, I'm not really sure what the authors meant by safe careers, but I can speak from experience and say that teaching doesn't necessarily feel like a safe career for LGBT community members, just because of right-to-work states. So this could, of course, influence students in their career paths, where they're not a public figure such as a teacher or a politician. They may go into areas where, their job isn't necessarily to communicate with members of the public, which could really not fit their interest or ability. This also further increases their distance from privilege. Now, how can we ensure equity for these gifted students of differing genders? Well, for females, we don't ignore the early signs of giftedness. And for males, we avoid kindergarten redshirting. For both groups, both genders, we help parents deal with gender role socialization to allow children to develop their own unique identity. Okay, this can mean allowing children to pick the color of things they want, whether it's pink or blue. My son actually has a play kitchen and a play vacuum because he loves to cook and clean. And he's rather masculine in his identity, but he also enjoys these things as well. Also, we can engage in holistic life planning rather than giving these kids essentially a map to follow. We can give them parameters in which they follow and give them advice, but we can't necessarily set their life up for them. Also, for women, we can teach resistance to stereotype threat and early sexualization. So there's a lot of issues today with TV shows where girls are doing pageants as toddlers. and where clothes for girls are a little bit more risque than people would like to see at such a young age. So we can teach the resistance to that. For boys, we can teach them methods to combat boredom and how not to deny interest just because they're seen as primarily female-dominated. For both groups, we can intervene to prevent bullying and promote self-esteem and give to students that diverge from heterosexual and gender role norms. Essentially, we can teach kids to be confident in themselves regardless of what their interests are. And if a child has a giftedness or a talent in a certain area, it shouldn't matter what their gender is. It should matter what they're passionate about and what they're going to do the most effectively in terms of a career. For girls, we should build awareness of health issues such as eating disorders, anxiety, and depression, as well as how to deal with perfectionism and stress. For boys, we can give them alternatives to traditional boy activities such as sports. Because if a kid doesn't really want to play a sport, or maybe he doesn't feel like he's as athletic, or he is being bullied, he could seriously be injured playing that sport. Or he could have extreme stress when faced with having to go to practice, or games, or locker rooms. So the final implication, it is our role as teachers to observe and carefully build a profile of success for each individual gifted student based on the avoidance of danger zones and achievement of milestones in his or her academic and career development. It's really easy to be drawn in these gender roles and to place them on students just because they were placed on us, perhaps. But I would encourage you to reanalyze these things and really allow students to be and become who they are and who they are supposed to be.